Hi, I'm Steve Addison, and this is episode 179 of the Movements Podcast. The podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today we're in Los Angeles talking to Rick and Jenny Prieto about their call to one another and to the nations.
In mind story into becoming a part of these multiplying movements where we're seeing new disciples make disciples, in many cases new churches multiply new churches, to God's glory. I think it starts at different times. We're newlyweds, just got married about 7 months ago. So our journey started each individually, and I think both of us had individual callings to live and work among unreached people groups in the world. Yeah, so I became a Christian when I was a freshman in high school. I started following Jesus, and a lot of the people that I was surrounding myself with right away would take these short-term mission trips overseas. And so I remember jumping into a couple short-term mission trips, and God was really starting to work on something in my heart on those trips. But there was a particular moment I remember where I was in college, and me and 5 college buddies decided we were going to take this road trip for a whole summer around the U.S. And we were all packed into this tiny little truck, and I remember being in this national park in the U.S. and I could see these snow-capped mountains like just out in front of me, and it wasn't audible, but I clearly understood God was putting on my heart that there were people that lived in mountains that were, 10, 20 times that size, and they would never know to worship him for it unless somebody went. And it was almost like this anchor in my heart that just started pulling in that direction. So I didn't know where tall mountains were or where the tallest mountains were. So I just started doing some Google searching, and I found the Himalayas, which are in South Asia. And so I just said, all right, God, will you give me an opportunity to minister in that area? It was just this very strange calling. And so a year after that moment, I found myself on a plane going to meet people I had never met before. I didn't know a single other person going, but it was just, for me, it was this test of faith that, God, I think, was testing my flexibility a little bit. And so I ended up overseas in the middle of I felt like water was 5 feet above my head. I didn't understand what was happening. I had an understanding of what a pastor did, because that was kind of where I was in the U.S. And I had this vague understanding of a missionary. But I get in this environment where I'm seeing national indigenous people that are owning the vision to reach their own people. And I expected the missionaries there to be like Western heroes to these people. And I had read books like that where that was the case. But that's not what I saw. What I saw was the missionaries were there to serve and empower the people to reach their own nation. So I'm there in the middle of this, and I was so sure, all right, God, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. Like, whatever my life looks like, I've got to be here, like, working with leaders like this. So I kind of started by diving into the deep end with this. And I was like, I felt like I was thrown in with the wolves there. But I learned so much about his kingdom and what it looks like to see whole areas reached with the gospel. And it was so simple too. It was very simple disciples that are just doing what's modeled to them. Like, something's exampled and they turn around and they do it. And then, just everything, keeping it biblical, keeping it simple, but in a way that will reproduce in different streams down. So. Right.
So I was so thankful to grow up in a home where Christ was honored. So my parents really taught me from a super early age what it was to love and follow Jesus, and they exemplified that so beautifully. So I always had that in front of me, and that model was set. So as a kid, I was really fascinated from a super early age. in missions. And so I loved reading missionary biographies. I recall back in first grade, I had this Bible, and I would write my prayer requests or people I was praying for in the front of the Bible. And so in first grade, 9/11 had just happened, and I was hearing all these things about terrorists, and all these different names were being thrown around. And I wrote that I was going to pray for bin Laden. Mm-hmm. In my first grade handwriting, completely misspelled, but I was praying for this terrorist that I'd heard about. And so I've always had this pull from very early on toward the unreached, toward people that I've never met, never heard about, but I just know they need Jesus. And that's all I knew, and that's all that mattered at that point. And so growing up, I was exposed to a lot of different types of missions. And I jumped in here and there, a lot of door-to-door evangelism, things like that, passing out gospel tracts. And for some reason, while I was still excited about it and excited the gospel was getting out, I always felt there's got to be some other way. There's so many people. How will we ever reach all of them? And how is the Lord going to do this? Like, I know he's going to, but just how is he going to do it? And it didn't quite add up in my head. And so I went through high school and college, and actually just early last year, I was attending a legacy church, and I heard this announcement about some gospel conversations training they were doing, and it definitely sparked my interest and curiosity. So I signed up for it, and I showed up on a Saturday. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, didn't know anyone who was there or leading it, but I'm sitting at this table, and I'm just watching these trainers take scripture and just unpack it. And it was all right there this whole time. The concept was not new. It was ancient. It's right there in scripture. But just the way that it was being set out before my eyes, and it made sense. It was tangible, it was practical, and it was spirit-filled. And so it just latched onto it, and God really awakened something in me even that day. Just so happens, and this is actually ends up being part of our story. Yeah. So that day that I was being trained in the 4 fields and gospel conversations and the 411, things like that, turns out the head trainer was this guy named Rick Priato. And all I knew that day is he was very, very well put together. He was a great leader, very handsome, had a great sense of humor, and somehow I got to meet this guy that day.
Wow.
So it was this collision of, I had no idea what God was going to do that day, but those elemental principles and just everything that was exploding in my head that day from what I learned ended up carrying me forth, obviously, until this place. But it was amazing how God made that the intersection of our lives was over this very work that we're now doing.
Yeah.
Hey, we're gonna put that in the promotional video.
Meet your spouse.
A singles gospel conversations training. Yeah.
So you guys got together, and so that was less than a year ago.
Yeah. Well, that was about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had this gap of time when I get back from this, it was several months I was spending in South Asia learning these things. And I came home from that trip, and there's this gap of time between when I'm like starting to help lead these trainings and be a part of these trainings. And, when I get home from that trip, so I get home and I have I have a really clear vision for what I want to do with my life. But there's this whole, if I were a good writer, I could fill a book with things I had to unlearn to be prepared for this kind of work. Because, once I started to realize God was calling me into ministry, I felt like I just had to gain more knowledge and more knowledge and more knowledge. So I started to pursue those things. But, when you're sitting in a village in the Himalayas with, 25 people worshiping Jesus at the potential cost of their life, it just caused me to think what I really needed to obey Jesus. And so I had this really difficult time when I got back of unlearning and trying to just add that to what I know. And I wrestled with a lot of what I had been taught. Most of it was awesome, taught growing up, but there were some things that I just couldn't get over. And I also wrestled with God. It helped my confidence to know that I could keep gaining knowledge. But I wasn't putting those things into practice. And I think that was, for me, what I had to get over. So I started trying to do those things for a year and just found myself really lonely and burned out.
So how did you get through that time? I mean, there's a big sort of shift going on in your understanding, but then you're frustrated because you're isolated and you're trying to apply it. So how did you overcome that?
Yeah, so there was a moment where I was just so frustrated. I called the missionaries that were in South Asia, and I said, guys, is there anybody in the U.S. who's doing this? This was about a year after I got back from South Asia. And they said, yeah, man, there's like hundreds of people that are doing this in the U.S. And so I happened to live about 4 hours from Troy Cooper. So they said, here's this guy's email, connect with him. So on a whim, I ended up hanging out with him and 7 of his kids. He has 7 kids. I was, ended up, they were at like some pool party and I dropped in, just met him. And, it was a fun little quick interaction, but I remember in that moment, like, here's a guy who's in the next phase of life from me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're going to have 7. Is that right?
Oh,
no. That's a conversation for the podcast in 20 years. We can talk about it then.
Next phase of life, married and family. Yeah.
And I just realized there was this craving in my heart that God had put there for mentorship and some guidance in this. And, I realized that part of the reason what I was seeing in South Asia was so amazing is because I was able to look ahead at what others were doing. And so that little meeting with Troy opened up this huge principle in my heart, which is just the value of having mentors and, like raising up other people. It was incredible for me because Troy believed in me in a way that many people around me couldn't. And the more I've been around that, the more it's infectious. And I want to, believe in the people that God's given me to steward as well. So I went from this broken, frustrated, I feel so undone state to, with just the encouragement of a mentor, this place where I'm just like on fire for this and ready to go. So that is about the time, probably a year and a half later that, after getting back from that, but I had walked through what was the muck, I think, of this journey for me. It was a really humbling time. But also, the other end of that has just been really freeing. And that's kind of where in the timeline, Jenny and I intersected there.
So what did it look like when you started engaging with Troy's encouragement and some more training? How did that work itself out?
Yeah, well, I continued to do the same things I had been doing for the past year, for that prior year, which was going out in my neighborhood and praying for people. I lived in a low-income neighborhood in Gainesville, Florida, where I was. And so I would go around and just love my neighbors, pray for them, and offer to share the gospel with anyone who would hear it. I saw occasionally people come to faith, but I was begging God for the lasting fruit. Well, after I see Troy mentor, encourage, and empower me, I'm like, man, what am I doing this by myself? So I just started casting vision to a few friends, and I was like, hey, would love to show you some things and take you out. We call it, go in the harvest with me and just go in God's harvest and pray and ask him to raise people up and to add disciples to the kingdom. And all of a sudden, there's these people around me who are experiencing the same things with me. From that, we've seen leaders that have come out of just that initial, hey, come out in the harvest with me, that are now themselves, mobilizing in this kind of pipeline headed overseas. But I didn't see that, 2 years down the road when I was encouraged to just invite some people out. All I saw was, man,
knowing in one sense what you're doing, you were forming a team.
Exactly.
and building a pipeline of future leaders just by grabbing a few friends and saying, I'll train you, let's go out.
Yeah.
Have you got a story of one of those people or of something God did when you went out into the harvest?
Yeah. We've got
so good.
one of my good friends. He's mobilizing to a country in South Asia here in a couple months. So we'll call him Sam. So Sam and he was one of the first people I invited out. And I was like, yeah, man, let's just we'll knock on a few doors, we'll greet a few people, and we'll stay out maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, and all of a sudden it's dark outside and we are still going. And this guy had just discovered like what he was born to do. Wow. And, we were acquaintances beforehand, but this guy was just waiting to be invited and unleashed. And, all it took was that quick invite. So we start going around, and for about a year and a half, we were going out in the harvest. We'd see new disciples come to faith. We saw some folks baptized in neighborhood pools and got the opportunity to disciple them and, connect them to Jesus. So, we get to lead them to faith, but then we don't just say, okay, figure it out. Here's a Bible. We got to, with the simple tools we were learning, we got to say, hey, let me walk with you as you learn who Jesus is and learn how to obey him. So it was cool, that experience. Sam was that his name? So Sam and I really connected through that, just in a deeper friendship that was connected to the work, which was just kind of a side effect that I didn't expect.
Tell us one of the stories of someone from the neighborhood who came to Christ and into discipleship.
Yeah, so there was one neighborhood we had heard about in Gainesville that had a ton of South Asians that lived there. And, Dan knew that, or Sam knew that my heart was, pulled to South Asians, and he had begun to kind of get that same heart, and for North Africans as well. So there's this neighborhood that's really, really diverse. So we go out in the neighborhood, and for a while we're praying for people and not seeing a lot of response. And we go out about 3 times. And the third time, there's this girl who had just moved to Gainesville. Her name's Destiny. And Destiny Dan walks up, and Sam walks up and shares his 15-second testimony of how he encountered Jesus with Destiny. And Destiny says, I want to hear about this Jesus. And so Sam shares the 3 circles with Destiny right there. And Destiny says, I want to follow this Jesus. Like, what's the next step? So she's like asking, and Sam's like, well, the next step is, you can get baptized and, begin to learn to obey Jesus. And so I think it was the next day they walked over to the neighborhood pool, and Sam and another guy that he had brought with him. So now Sam's doing the same thing, training somebody else. They got to baptize her together. So that was a really cool, like, okay, the rubber just met the road. How are we going to steward this new disciple now?
Great. And so around that time, you guys are getting together as a couple. You're working out your futures together. How did you, as a couple, start sort of getting engaged in the harvest and learning these things together?
Yeah, Dave, why don't you?
Right. So similarly to the way that, Rick took Sam out in the harvest, I also started going out with them, in groups, and was just amazed. So coming from a background where, for me, it had been mostly like a shy method of sharing the gospel, kind of a half-hearted, low risk, maybe give them a flyer or a pamphlet or invite them to church on a Sunday. Now we were actually engaging them with truth and with a simple gospel presentation and our testimonies. And I'll never forget just one of the first times that we went up to this guy's door in this apartment complex. And I'd heard things about a person of peace and how there are people in the harvest that God has prepared to hear his message and that they're ready to receive. So it's still a concept in my head, though, at that point. And to see that come to life, so we knock on this guy's door, and I was able to share a testimony with him and share the 3 circles, which is a gospel tool that we use. And all of a sudden, just without any hesitation, he he was ready. And I just asked the question, which circle are you in, or where are you at right now? And he identified in brokenness, and he said that he wanted to receive Jesus. And I almost was just floored because I was just not ready for that. I'd never seen that before, just that quick obedience and that faith that was ready to say yes right away. And so, but to be empowered with where to take that conversation and how to lead this guy to the Lord was so new to me and so exciting. I'll never forget just that whole experience. So Rick was really awesome about just bringing us along. We'd often go out in groups and spend a whole afternoon. And it's funny because Sam is so great. He's actually bivocational. He's an ER nurse, and I'm also an ER nurse. So we had that in common. But I love how he would be so systematic. He had a vision to see this whole apartment complex, every single door, knocked on every single person shared with. And so he had a list. He was checking them off. And so we went through, that entire complex over that summer. He was able to take different folks through. So I love how in all of that, it's just been such a journey of relational time as well. All of this about movements and strategy, really the core of this is a bunch of people who love Jesus, who have a vision just like he did, who share the vision of Jesus to see the ends of the earth reached, and we're just doing it together in community. Yeah. So it's hard to separate those two, really. They can't be separated.
Yeah. So Jenny won't brag on herself, but I would love to do that.
Oh my gosh.
So she comes to this training. This is how I noticed Jenny. She comes to this training, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this girl's beautiful. So I trade contact info with several different people at the training.
Oh, this is what he said. He was like, hey guys, I would just love to follow up with all of you and give you some more ministry opportunities.
Yeah.
So there's some follow up there.
That's right. So she goes home and she trains her whole family that night in some of the tools that we learned that day. And I ran into her randomly at Starbucks later that week.
Okay. Randomly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Might have even been the Holy Spirit. Who knows?
Yeah, that's right. And she's training somebody there at Starbucks. And I'm like, oh my goodness, who is this girl? So it was cool. It was kind of at this point, I'm so focused. I'm like, man, I'm ready. Let's go. And then all of a sudden there's this girl who's like blowing me out of the water. And she's like, I'm just so impressed by her. So we start getting to know each other. And I think one of the first things we clarified was that, the calling, that we both had this calling.
Yeah.
Especially for folks going overseas. I feel like that's been something that's been really important for us to know that from the start. Like Jenny will never feel like Rick has dragged me overseas, when things get difficult, because that's her calling as well. So I'm not saying God doesn't work it out other ways, but for us, that has helped us learn so much and trust so much together, because we know that we were individually called, and then God ordained to bring us together.
Right.
So that was helpful in the learning process.
So what are you learning about how God shapes the people? He's brought you together, and he's had you on these separate journeys, and they've coincided now. And you have a sense of call in the future that you'll be overseas or cross-cultural somewhere. What are you learning about how God is shaping you and preparing you along the way?
That's good. You have any thoughts, Ben?
Wow. There's so much there. I know that in so much of this, it's been amazing, just the way that when God does place that call, number one, he's just so kind about it, if that makes sense. It's the most beautiful thing to be, specifically called out when he's given us all of, this great commission, and that's universal to every believer. But to hear from the Lord that he has this work set out for us, and that we've been asked to be part of that specifically, is just so humbling to begin with. And I think part of the sacrifice that comes with that is that being called out means that there's this other group that you're leaving, essentially. And so even for me, very specifically, recently just moving from Florida to California and leaving behind everything that I knew as far as my family and community there, and being called out of that into this new journey and this new phase was just a small piece, obviously, of ultimately what God has, but has been training my heart for that. That realization that is such a small sacrifice and it is so worth it. Because even realizing this life is a breath and that our days are so short, we have this little tiny life, and God just asked one thing of us, and that is to get his glory everywhere. And so in light of that, it's worth it. It's worth it to leave normal and to be really different and make big decisions like that sometimes don't make sense to other people, and face some criticism. All of that is just tiny compared to the weight of that glory, and realizing that Jesus is so worth it. So while there have been some moments, absolutely, and some hard days and some doubts that can creep up sometimes, but just being reassured constantly that Jesus is King. And so all of this plays into his story so beautifully.
Yeah, I think for me, the principle I'm learning, even the more we get to share our own story, is that God gives us exactly what we're ready for, exactly when he wants us to have it. And not being able to see like 3 months ahead all the time where God's going to have us, what lesson we're going to be learning, whether it's about the work or just about being godly and, being Christ-like, or like lessons in abiding or leadership that we're learning. It's a gift to just not know what to expect. And I'm just learning about his Father's heart to prepare us for exactly what we need. Yes. And I'm thinking back to even jobs that I had when I was a teenager that felt so useless or felt so meaningless in the moment. And God has just used every piece of that to prepare us, which is interesting. I think I'm a very like process oriented thinker and a systems oriented thinker. So for me to look back like that and see the journey as developing, like it's almost painful for me to say, because I want to say, no, it's the process that develops people, or you can put it in a system, but it really has been, the Father in his timing that teaches us one lesson at a time. And the seasons where I'm abiding the most, like when I'm spending an hour a day, at least in the Word and in prayer, is when I can really connect with what God's teaching me in a season. And I, from what I know from long-term workers overseas, it only gets harder to connect with God in that way. And so I think the most important lesson in all this, like as God develops the calling, it, for me, has been deeper and deeper abiding, like never less abiding than I did a year ago. So just always increasing how much time I'm spending with the Father, how much time in prayer. I think that's helped me absorb all the different lessons God is teaching, and it keeps us grounded.
Your move from Gainesville in Florida to Southern California is the next stage in your development that's right. Just begun. And so you're out in the field and you're with a team, and you're intentionally growing in your faith and in ministry, right? Because God will have another assignment at the end of this time. Is that your sense of things?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I would say for us, you mentioned us being on a team out here. I think that is so central to why this journey is happening for us in multiple steps. Because there was a temptation for me as soon as I knew God had called me to that, to leave my bags at home and go. And there would have been something like a little bit gratifying about doing that. But I've seen it firsthand overseas that people get really lonely, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with conflict on teams in different cultural contexts. So getting to see even some some damages that has done overseas in South Asia, coming back for me, I was like, if I'm going to go overseas and if I'm going to bring my wife with me, like we need to go with a team that's healthy. And so one of our biggest prayers in coming out here is being a part of a team and learning how to function on a team better, but also casting vision for others who are in the work here. Mm-hmm. Will you come with us? Folks that we get to labor with in the harvest, training in community in church with here, that we get to say, hey, would you pray about considering to be a part of our team overseas? And our prayer with that, and what we're starting to see as others are going before us in this, is that it gives people some longevity overseas, that they're able to kind of breathe a little bit because they're with friends and not just coworkers. And it gives them, real like biblical koinonia community overseas. But for us, it's interesting. I would say personally, this has shifted for me from being about overseas ministry to unreached people groups, where my heart is so, like, I care so deeply about the lostness here in California right now. Mm-hmm. Like I can't even explain how God has shifted my heart, where I know we're going, that, our eyes are set on the nations, but my heart breaks when I wake up in the morning and see the lostness that's here in California. So the work here is enough to compel me to go, and is also enough to compel me to drill down here. So I don't know. I think the idea of a pipeline going overseas, like I don't think it's a mobilization strategy. A lot of people have like a mobilization strategy. For us, it's like, man, how do we steward the movement that God is already working here? So we've got these faithful people all over the U.S., all over Southern California, and all of California. So we're more asking the question, okay, God, how do you want to expand what you're doing here? Even as our heart is breaking for losses. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. Even just that, we've learned a lot. Well, me personally, I've learned so much. I was talking to one of our teammates recently, and just processing and realizing that even though, spending 10 years in one place in Florida and having amazing friends and family and relationships there, I have still never had community like this. It's just so different when you are on a team and you're all laboring with that same vision and that same heartbeat, and there's that brotherly love among us, and there's so much unity. It's so reminiscent of the book of Acts, and it's just the most incredible thing to be part of. Even just in a few short weeks, that has developed so rapidly. And just having that support and that encouragement and the sharpening that goes along with that has been so encouraging. And to think about that, taking that concept and just translating that in another culture gives me so much hope, because I hear from a lot of other missionaries that is the hardest part about the first few years of being overseas, is just all the culture shock and all the team drama and so much that goes on that's almost peripheral. And to think that the Lord is providing that team structure for us here that we'll be able to transplant to a different context is really incredible. And we're so excited about that.
Thanks to everyone who's been spreading the word about the Movements podcast through social media and other methods. This has been Steve Addison for the Movements podcast.